strongest predictor of who was going to live longer and stay healthier was the quality of people's relationships with other people. The people who had the best relationships, the warmest relationships with other people, stayed healthy, lived longer, and of course were happier. People seem to be asking about a good life more and more because unhappiness is increasing and loneliness is increasing.
はい、ピボットの竹下です。ピボットグローバル始まります。今日はですね、グッドライフというこちらの本を書いた、ロバート・ウォールディンガー博士に話を聞きます。この博士はですね、テッドトークの歴代の中でも、ついにベスト10に入るぐらい人気な先生で、なんとですね、実はハーバードに84年にわたって、史上最長の、研究と言われている研究がありまして、人間が幸せな人生を送るためにどうするのかっていうことをもうずっと8年間ずっといろんな人にインタビューしまくって、医療記録も取って研究しまくってるんですね。その結論がここに詰まっている本で、どうやったらいい人間関係を築けて、どうやって幸せになって、人生が豊かになるかっていうことを研究している人です。では早速、ロバート・ウォールディンガー博士につないでみましょう。Hi, so Dr. Waldinger, welcome to Pivot. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so congratulations on your book. It's just released in Japan, The Good Life. Are you excited to have your Japanese version out?
We are very excited because these are such important ideas and we want people to read about them, to know about them, and to change their lives based on these ideas.
So I believe everyone at every age, every time, every era, people are interested in having a good life. But do you see some particular interest in people or readers that they're focused on or questioning themselves about having a good life? Do you think can you give us the context why your book is out right now?
People seem to be asking about a good life more and more because unhappiness is increasing and loneliness is increasing. And people are worried about the breakdown of various traditional cultures that often keep people in sort of structures that have helped them be happy for many years. And on the one hand, that's good because there's progress, but people are then asking, well, how do I live my life now if I don't live in the more traditional ways that my parents and grandparents lived?
Why is that? Is it because of technology or recently the pandemic, or what has happened?
Yes, all of those. Technology, the pandemic, more mobility. So we know that people are moving away from their communities to new communities for a different job, for example. And while that's a good thing, they also lose their social connections that way. So there are many of these factors that are combining to make people feel more disconnected and to wonder, well, how do I put a life together that is happier?
How's it like in the United States? What's the situation right now?
Well, loneliness is increasing. People's level of happiness is going down. And people are particularly worried after the pandemic because so much is changing. Styles of work are changing. There's a lot of debate in the US, perhaps in Japan. Is it better to work remotely, to work at home the whole time? Or is it better to go into the office? And there are many debates, and there's no single answer that fits every person. But people are then beginning to wonder, what do I want my daily life to be like if I don't go to an office every day?
Are the people returning to the office or are split? Like some people are returning to the office, some people are staying home. What's the situation like?
It's every combination. Some people are completely in the office. Some people are completely at home. Some people are in the office 2 days a week and at home 3 days a week. There's quite a bit of variation in the US.
I'm surprised to hear in the news about the great resignation or quiet quitting, because I know this is a stereotypical image, but for people living in Japan, United States is a country of very positive excitement. People are individualistic. Do you think it's United States in a time of change? What's happening in the US?
It is the time of change. I think that has a lot to do with it. So the pandemic and the lockdown made people ask the question, what is my life about? What do I really want in my life? Because there was this big global threat. And often at times of global threat, we ask those big questions. When there's war, we ask those questions. What's really important to me? And so people were suddenly faced with this threat to their lives, to their families. And it made us all ask, what's important? Some people looked at their jobs and said, this job isn't worth spending all this time on, so I want to look for something different.
Interesting. So let's talk about your book. Before going into the details, I want our audience of Pivot to know about the study, what Harvard has been doing for almost more than 80 years. And in your book, The Good Life, you mentioned that it started when the US was about to get off the Great Depression, and it started with 268 Harvard students and also 456 young gentlemen. And the Harvard studied they asked questions and they studied about their lifestyle, their health records, their exercise records, their weight. Do they consume alcohol? So could you tell me about this study? What kind of study and why Harvard started this project?
Yes. It was very unusual in 1938 to study thriving, to study what goes well in human development. Most of our research is about what goes wrong so that we can help people. And so both of these, so they started as two separate studies. One, a study of Harvard undergraduate students, 19 years old, and what helped them thrive as they moved into young adulthood. And the other study, as you said, was from the city of Boston, young men from Boston's poorest neighborhoods and most troubled families. And again, the question was, with so many problems in these families, what helped these young people thrive? What allowed them to stay on good developmental paths and not get into trouble, for example? It was a study of juvenile delinquency and what kept some children from becoming delinquents. And neither of these studies was planned to go for 85 years. They thought the studies might last 5 years. And so it's completely unheard of. It's completely unique in the history of science that a study has lasted 85 years of the same families, not just young men, but then their spouses, now their children, more than half of whom are women. So it's a very rare study. Will never be done again.
Right. So you mentioned that it was very unique at that time for people to become interested in how people thrive. Could you give us context? What was the main objective of this research, this study?
Well, there were two different objectives. So one, as I said, was to see what were the factors that predicted that someone born into a very troubled, poor family would thrive, would not get into trouble, would have a good life, right? So that was the question. Even if you are born into terrible conditions, how do you thrive? But with the Harvard undergraduates, they were chosen by their professors as being good examples of fine, upstanding young men. And actually, it was funded by a man who owned a chain of department stores, and he wanted to know what are the characteristics that make someone a good department store manager. So that was his interest.
Okay.
But they never answered that question.
They never answered. Okay. Interesting. So throughout the study, I know the best way to find out the results is read your book, but could you give us some key points, key takeaways our audience can take away? What was the main results that the study has found out?
Yes, two main results. One is no surprise. It's that if you take care of your health, you are happier, you live longer, you stay healthier. And so that means exercising regularly, eating good food, not smoking, not abusing alcohol or drugs. All of that is really important. And it predicted which people were going to live the longest and stay the healthiest. But the big finding that we did not expect was that the strongest predictor of who was going to live longer and stay healthier was the quality of people's relationships with other people. The people who had the best relationships, the warmest relationships with other people, stayed healthy, lived longer, and of course were happier. But the happiness wasn't a surprise. The surprise was, how could good relationships make it less likely that you would get heart disease or diabetes or arthritis? How could that be possible? And so what we realized was that other studies were finding the same thing. So it wasn't just our study. And that's important because no one research study can prove these kinds of facts. But when many studies find the same thing, that's when we know we can believe in the finding.
So you started with a couple of young students, but you started to combine other studies, other scientific findings to kind of build this research project.
No, we stayed with these 724 families, but compared our study to other studies that were going on, right? Because let's say our study found that good relationships keep us healthier and happier. Maybe our study is a fluke. Maybe it doesn't represent the truth of life for most people. Okay. Maybe we are just a rare exception. But when we see that other studies are finding the same thing, then we know that it's true. Now it's a very established fact that good relationships, interpersonal connections, promote health as well as happiness.
So why does good relationship leads to happiness or even health? Because it's obvious that good relations is good for your life, but why does it lead to so much happiness or even health?
Right. That's what we've been studying for the last 10 years. So the best theory that we have is about stress. That the theory is that relationships help us manage stress. So, all of us have stressful things happen, sometimes every day, that life is filled with stress. When we are stressed, the body changes. Our blood pressure goes up, our heart beats faster, we breathe faster. And when the stress is removed, our bodies are meant to return to equilibrium, to a baseline. If I have something stressful happen today, and I get all upset, if I have someone I can talk to at the end of the day and talk about my day, I can literally feel my body calm down. And what we think happens is that people who don't have anyone people who are isolated, don't have anyone to talk to, that those people stay, their bodies stay in an agitated state. So they have higher levels of circulating stress hormones like cortisol. They have higher blood pressure. They have higher levels of inflammation. And that those things break down many different systems in the body because these are people who can't quite calm down in the way that a good relationship helps us calm down.
Interesting. So is that the part which is unique of the study? Because it's very scientific and based on research of what's happening inside the human body, instead of just saying, oh, good relationship is good, so you should have a good relationship. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because, you know, our grandmothers told us that you should have good relationship, right? Right. So why do I need my study to tell us that? It's because we find out there are these really important mechanisms that make this true. You know, and in science, we ask the question, how does this work? So if we find a connection between relationships and health, that's not enough. Then we ask, well, why is that connection there? How does it happen? What's the mechanism?
Yeah, I want to talk about what good relationships means. What's the definition of good relationship? Because relationships can be a stress in a sense, or especially these days, there's so many social media, and I myself get tired of getting notifications or messages from everyone. So what's the definition of a good relationship, and can relationships become a stress sometimes in life?
Yes, and most relationships have some stress in them. So most important relationships have conflict. We often have disagreements in relationships. That's normal. So a good relationship is not without disagreement. The question is, can we in a relationship find ways to work out our disagreements so that both people feel okay, feel good when they've worked it out, right? I mean, romantic couples have to do this, but we have to do this at work. We have to do this with friends. We have to do this with siblings, right? So the question is not about whether there are stresses or disagreements. The question is, do we find ways to work out disagreements that leave us feeling okay?
So has the definition of good relationship changed over the 80 years, or is it kind of a universal thing? It doesn't change throughout the years?
That's a really good question. I don't think the definition has changed. You know, so many things have changed about our social roles.
Right.
So, you know, a good relationship, when we started, good relationships in a couple was that the man went to work and the woman stayed home and she raised the children and she kept the home nice. Now all those roles have changed, but the basis of good relationships, of affection, respect, those haven't changed in 85 years.
Interesting. I want to talk about introverts because recently I interviewed a writer from Taiwan. She wrote about the power of being quiet. And there are a lot of introverts in Japan. So do you think, you know, some people like to be alone. Do you think your theory applies to introverts, or what's your take on that?
I do think so. And it's good that we're talking about this because I don't want to give the impression that to stay healthy and be happy, you have to have lots of friends, lots of people in your life, and you have to love parties. No, that what we know is that many people are introverts. That's normal. That what we think is true is that everyone, including introverts, needs at least one or two relationships where they feel supported. But that for introverts, they may not need more than that. They may not. In fact, it may be stressful to have a lot of people in their life. But when our original study participants were in there, at one point we asked them, who could you call in the middle of the night if you were sick or scared? And most people could list several people, but some people couldn't list anyone. And we think that everybody, even if you're an introvert, needs at least one or two people who you feel will be there for you when you're having a difficult time.
I want to talk about, there's like a kind of a worksheet in your wonderful book, and about being, you can list who are your closest friends and relatives. Could you like go over this? What we should do? We should write down. Could you go over this worksheet?
Yes, it's just a way to list who's important to you in your life. And it can be a way to start reflecting on who's in your life. Mostly we don't think about this. Like we never make this kind of list, right?
No.
We always take our relationships for granted. Partly because relationships were there from the time we were tiny. You know, so relationships have been there in our lives since before we could even walk or talk. So they're more like the background. They're more like the air we breathe, as we say, that we don't think about, well, who's in my life? What are my relationships? So this is a way to start looking at, okay, who is in my life? And how do I feel about the number of people who I consider close friends and relatives? Do I have enough people? Do I have too many people? And do I feel close to people who I never see? And should I see them more often? It helps us begin to ask those questions that we usually never ask ourselves.
So why is it important to write their names? Because like you mentioned, it's so obvious we take this for granted and we say, oh, we know who are my close friends, our relatives, our families. Why is it important to actually write their names down?
Well, because it makes it specific. It makes it very concrete. Otherwise, I can sit here thinking, oh, yeah, I have lots of friends. I have lots of people I'm close to. But if I have to list them, I say, oh, you know, I don't have very many people. Or, oh, I have lots of people. I have so many people. There's not enough room on this chart for all the people, right? And it's a very helpful way to begin to reflect on that part of my life that normally I don't think about.
One more interesting chart in your book is about, there's like a vertical and a horizontal social universe you mentioned in your book. Could you explain to us what this chart is about?
Well, we think about relationships as having, you know, at least a couple of big qualities. One is how frequently do we see each other? So that horizontal line, it goes from infrequent on the left to frequent. And, you know, some people I see very frequent. I see my wife several times a day. I see my closest friend. He lives in another city. I see him maybe twice a year, right? So he's someone who's important to me, but I see him very infrequently. Then on the vertical line, there's the dimension of whether the relationship feels energizing or depleting. So I might, when I get together with my friend, even though I only see him twice a year, we get so excited when we're together and we talk about our lives and we talk about our memories of the past. We went to school together. It's very energizing. I have other people in my life who always make me feel sad or make me feel exhausted. People who just want to tell me their problems and are never curious about me, for example. And so what we think is helpful is to put your relationships, to make a dot somewhere on this little map that sort of puts the relationship in the, that rates it in terms of how energizing or depleting it is and how frequently or infrequently you see that person. And then what we suggest in the book is that you can draw a little arrow if you think, I'd like to move this relationship in a particular direction. Make a little arrow showing yourself how you'd like to change that relationship.
Interesting. So if you have a friend you only meet 1 or 2 times a year, and they are kind of only talking about themselves, and you don't have a good time, you get depressed, you put his or her name on the bottom left. But
Exactly.
If you want him or her to become more energizing friend, you put an arrow so you can put him or her on the top left.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And about your wife or your family, you see him or her like every day, so you put on her name on the top right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If it's energizing. So frequently and energizing would be top right. Frequently and depleting would be bottom right.
Okay. Do you do this on yourself also?
I have done it. Yeah. When we were writing the book, we said, well, let's do this. Let's try it.
What was your results? Did you have your friends and families on everyone on the top, or?
No, I had some relationships. I had relationships all over this map. And I wanted to draw some arrows saying, gee, I'd like to change that. I have a couple of friends who are very depleting. They don't, I always feel down when I'm with them. And it made me think, well, how could I change that?
So this is my similar question of writing the names of your closest friends and relatives. What's the positive effect of plotting your friends and families on this chart?
Well, again, it helps me learn about kind of who's in my life and what are the qualities of these relationships. So one of the things I found, so I'm a psychiatrist, and so my job is to listen to people a lot. But what I found was that with many of my relationships, I was just listening, and I wasn't able to talk about myself. I wasn't getting very much back. I was mostly just listening to other people's problems, even in my private life, because my profession is to listen to people's problems.
Yes.
And so it was helpful to see this on this map and to say, oh, maybe I should change how I am in my relationships, right, with these people. Maybe I should talk more. Maybe I should not just listen. Maybe I should ask them to do different activities with me, not just to sit there and listen as they tell me their problems. So it made me rethink some of my relationships.
So I think you just made a good point about changing that, writing an arrow and trying to change the relationship into a good one. So in order to build a good relationship, is it the responsibility of yourself, or do you need to change them, or is it both?
Have you ever tried to change another person?
Yes, but it was not a success.
Exactly. How does that work out? Not very well.
It became a stress for me. Yeah.
Exactly. So one of the things we know is that yes, we can ask other people to treat us differently. We can, and sometimes that really helps. And so, we can make some improvements in that way, but we can't count on changing who another person is fundamentally. So then the question is, how do we work with that? Do we change ourselves? Do we change the relationship? So maybe I have a relationship that I don't enjoy because all we do is sit and have tea and I listen to their problems. But maybe this is a person I could go on bicycle rides with. Maybe this is a person who would go to a football match with me or something else, right? So maybe I can change what we do together so that I don't count on the person changing because he's not going to change probably, right?
Yeah, I have an exact example in my mind. Like this is a few years ago, and I had some colleague who is always talking about himself, and I tried to persuade him to, literally say, I said talk less, but he didn't change. So, well, I understand that it's myself that has to change, but that's a very difficult challenge for me because it feels to me that the person is the problem and not me. So how can you change this kind of mindset? And
well, first of all, the person might be the problem. So let's say, one of the things, let's say we have a very difficult relationship. The first question is this relationship important enough to me that I will work on it? Because some people, we don't know them very well. We don't have much invested in the relationship. And maybe it's just not a good match. And so we see that person less. We step away. But then you think about relationships where we have a lot invested. Maybe we're married. Maybe we have children together. So we don't walk away from those relationships easily. Those are the relationships where we say, I'm going to see how this can be improved. Now, eventually, as we know, some people get divorced and they decide, I can't make this better. It just isn't working. But usually we try to make a relationship better if we have a lot invested. And so I think the first step is to assess, okay, how important is this relationship? And therefore, how much will I work to preserve it?
So can you give some advice for people? So like more practical advice, how can you change yourself and start building the good relationships? Any other advice you can give us?
Yeah, we found when we studied, what are good relationships, right? If sometimes they do have conflict, they're not always smooth and happy. Well, we found that one of the things about good relationships is that it's mutual. There's a lot of give and take. And so if you're in a relationship where it's one-sided, the other person does all the giving, maybe I need to start giving more, or the other person does all the taking. Maybe I need to start asking more for what I need, right? So there's mutuality. The other thing that is really important is curiosity. If you think about people we've known for a long time, we often stop being curious about them. In fact, they did a study of how well we know our romantic partners, and they found that the people we know the best are not the partners we've been with for 20 years. They're the partners we're just starting to get to know. Because if you think about it, we're so interested in this new person and we're interested in whether this person likes me, right?
Yeah.
So we pay attention. And then as we're together longer, we stop paying attention. So the question is, can we bring curiosity to relationships that are long and even feel old and stale? So can we keep being curious? Like, who is this person? I've been married for 37 years, and and I have dinner with my wife almost every night. And so, so the question is, like, sometimes I think, what can I find here that's new when we talk? What's different, to try to challenge myself to remain curious. So that's another factor. And then there's a another factor we found in good relationships, which is that we're always changing, right? So we, think about how different you are than you were 20 years ago, right? Right. And our partners are always changing. So I think that the question is, can we accept change in each other? And actually support that change, because no one stays the same and no relationship stays the same. So part of it is trying to appreciate the fact that our relationships are going to change and the other person in the relationship is going to change, and to appreciate that and support it.
How can you do that? You should talk with your husband or wife more? You should take your husband or wife on a date, or
Yes.
How can you do that? Okay.
Yes. So, and not just husband or wife, right? It could be friends. It could be
friends,
a relative, right?
Relative,
yes. So with the best advice I got when we had our first child, was to have a date night and we did that. So my wife and I, when you have children, you become more like a team where,
right. Yeah.
I'll make dinner.
Yeah.
You change the diapers, you give the baths, right? You're more a team, and you stop paying attention to each other. So True. The best advice I got was, have one night a week where you go out on a date. You hire a babysitter to come and stay with the children automatically. So you don't have to think about it every week. It's automatic. We did that. And so we would go out, and sometimes we wouldn't do much of anything. We would just go out and take a walk, or sometimes we would go shopping, or we would do whatever, but just having time alone to catch up. And I think that that's one of the things you can do to liven up a relationship that feels stale.
So the trick is to schedule it, because you're kind of forced to go out. So instead of just choosing that date.
Exactly. Yeah. And we actually had to cancel the babysitter if we didn't go out. So it was, and so it makes it, if you build it in automatically. I'll give you another example. My colleague, Mark Schultz, who wrote the book with me, he and I he lives in another city. He and I have been friends for years, for 25 years. We have a phone call every Friday at noon, and it's automatic. We have to cancel it if we're not going to have that phone call. And that means that we stay very current with each other's lives and work, and because we do it automatically. Now, obviously, you can't do that with everyone in your life. There are too many people, but a few people, it's really worth that effort.
Wow. So you do the call like every Friday. It's so scheduled in your calendar every week.
Every week.
Wow. That's interesting advice, because I also have a close friend, and we say to each other, let's do a Zoom call. He lives abroad, but we never do it, So, yeah.
What if you did one every month? What if you put a Zoom call on your calendar, the two of you, and you just know it shows up on your calendar, and so you do it?
That's a good advice, because we always talk about when we are ready or when we have time, we can schedule it. But that's maybe the way of thinking, is that pre-scheduling it and forcing each other to be on that time. Yeah.
And then you have to exchange emails and work out you just have it in your calendar and you build everything else around it. What we find is that people who have friends at work are more excited to go to work. They're more excited to be at work every day. So many leaders of companies feel that friendships at work are a distraction.
Yeah.
And workers who have friends will be less productive. But it turns out it's the opposite. Many of our happiest people were people who said, some of my closest friends were my workmates, right? And because you do better work, you're happier to be on a working team if you're friends, if you know about each other's personal lives.